I want to give our ANFT trainers an update on what I've been learning and thinking lately. And so this is a brief video on Imaginal Alchemy. I'll ask that you not share it, that this be shared only for trainers. I'm making it today, November 6th of 2021, and it should be a brief video that I hope will raise some questions and probably stir up some dialogue and also increase your headroom on the topic of what do we mean by imaginal. It's always been a strong part of my intuition about force therapy that the imaginal realm is a very important part of the process of creating heart-to-heart relationships between humans and the more than human world, and also bringing forth what I've referred to as medicine. I want to start with this quote from Einstein. Imagination, he said, is more important than knowledge. Now, I don't think he was just being cute. I think he really meant this. And it's something that, to me, is an invitation to be very curious about what do we mean by imagination. We can look at the word and think of imagination maybe as a root, and we can look into that, what grows out of that root. We see terms like image and imaginal and mage and magic. And while I'm not going to speak much of mage and magic, all four of those terms are quite relevant to what it is that I've been thinking and want to discuss. There's an important theory of perception called the interface theory of perception. A physicist named Donald Hoffman is the main developer and promoter, along with his team, of this theory. And what he says is that our senses don't actually perceive reality, but instead create icons that are representations of physical reality. So right now, the computer that you're looking at is not the reality of what I'm saying, but on your computer screen, there may be icons. For example, there may be a text document. Now, you know when you're looking at that the text and the document itself are actually stored as bits and bytes and somewhere deep within the program of the computer, and they're not the actual document. So that would be an icon on your computer screen that represents a deeper reality that you'd have to have quite a bit of technical knowledge to understand. And what Hoffman says is that everything we see is essentially this, like icons, that when you see a stone, that's a kind of an icon, that our senses are put together that represent a reality that is quite different than what we think it is. So the icons themselves are not reality, but have to be taken seriously. So we can't say, oh, that card's just an icon. I can step in front of it as it speeds down the street. No, because there are real world consequences to how we interact with the various icons of reality. So Hoffman really discusses this sensate interface. The leap that I make is that imagination is an alternative interface, and there's probably other interfaces that we have for interacting with the worlds around us. So the imaginal interface contacts a different layer of reality than does the sensate interface. And that imaginal layer of reality may be closer in some ways to whatever actual reality is than is the sensate layer. And so I put on this slide, you can just look this up on YouTube, Donald Hoffman, the TED interview. And there's a link there if you want to get more background information about this foundation in physics. Now, we're going to go into mostly my thinking at this point, but I've been heavily influenced by a French philosopher and theologian, the late Henry Corbin, who really brought forward some understanding from 12th and 13th century mystical Islam, Sufism, and and then also James Hillman, who's a recent neo-Jungian therapist and thinker. They talk about imaginal worlds. I believe Corbin coined the term mundus imaginalis. So the imaginal realm is not a fantasy made up realm, but is an actual world, just like we experience this actual world. It's just that our sensory uh, interface doesn't present us with icons of the imaginal world, but through our imagination, we can contact the imaginal world. And that contact takes place as an exchange of images. So I want to start talking about my my imaginal contacts with, say, a tree. So if I'm contacting a tree, imaginally I'm presenting the tree with an image, and then the tree is presenting me with an image, and that image, the imprint of the tree's image, is meeting me in this imaginal capacity that we'll talk about a little bit more also. If we have a successful exchange of images, it can create a relationship. So I'm going to tell a brief story that maybe you've heard before. After I had taken initiation as an elder, I realized I really have no idea what it means to be an elder. So about a year after that initiation, I went on a pilgrimage to ask the eldest. So the eldest living being on the planet is that's known anyway is a bristlecone pine living in the Inyo Mountains of California, actually the White Mountains of California, just north of the Inyo Range. And so I was fasting that day, and I was at something like 11, 12,000 feet elevation, so it was a little hard to breathe, along with at the time, I had a very serious cardiovascular disease, and so that made it difficult too. And so I walked in, I think it's about 2.5 miles to try to find this tree. There were some adventures involved in finding it. It's not really obvious. And it pointed out to me when I approached it, it gave me the message, and in this way that I feel I get messages from trees, that um, it preferred to stay in a state of, what would I say, contemplation or meditation, but that it had an understudy, this other tree nearby, and that I could take my inquiry to that other tree. So this other tree was a younger tree. The Methuselah tree, the oldest tree, is about 4,800 years old, and this other tree was a young one, maybe only 4,000 years old, give or take a few centuries. But I sat with that tree with this very sincere question, which was, what does it mean to be an elder? And I had quite a long exchange with it. So I want you to imagine that I'm sitting in front of, you've probably seen these trees, how they've got a lot of dead wood, and there's a little bit of green growing off to the side, but the place that I was sitting was facing this dead gray grains of wood, maybe dead for 1,000 years or more, for all I know. And so I was closing my eyes and opening them as I was meditating and praying. And I was saying essentially, eldest, please teach me what it means to be an elder. And after 40 minutes or so of this, I had my eyes closed, I opened, and right on this dead wood was this very fresh drop of this liquid golden sap. that had appeared. And so there was this meeting was, and prayer was answered by this offering of this sap, which I ended up taking into my body. And I can tell that story in greater detail at some time. But the image here that I was bringing was this question, this intention that I had to bring a question and look for an answer. The image of the tree was first made an impression on my imagination, but essentially manifested through an alchemical or a magical process, this piece of sap that I then took as medicine into my body. So this, I would say, was a successful exchange of images, dramatically so. Usually it's not so dramatic. And when this relationship is created, it is a new autonomous entity that's alive in the imaginal realm, in the human heart. So prior to this exchange, the tree was an entity, I was an entity, we met in this way, and then this new entity appears. In this case, it was symbolized by the drop of sap, by me taking that in, but often this entity is not, it just remains, it's not physically manifested, it remains in the imaginal realm where it can do its work, and its work is medicine. It can live through us and we can embody it as medicine. Now, each of these relationships is unique. So it's unique to each person. I put in here this little phrase, an imaginal being created by a dyad. And the nature of that relationship is medicine. So you've all heard me say before that all medicine is relational. And I've given easier to understand example of that, which is when someone is hurting, say, or in need, they can draw out of me a compassionate response that is hopefully healing, and that is an expression of my best self or my better self. And by drawing that medicine out of me, not only are they hopefully going to benefit from that, but I benefit on my own journey, my own soul's journey, by embodying that medicine. So that's, I think, also a good story about medicine. And then I'm offering you the imaginal story about medicine, which is when images meet, a new medicine is created. We'll look at that a little bit more. When we're in the imaginal world, when we develop our capacity to really be in the imaginal world, we start learning about its characteristics. So just as children and as adults, we learn more about the geography and the physics of this world, we start learning about the imaginal world also. So in the imaginal world, for example, there are recognizable geographies, like there are canyons and rivers and mountain ranges and forests and meadows, but they have a fluid quality. So they don't necessarily stay put. That might be related to time, because time is non-linear. It's not a steady pace. In the imaginal world, we can remember the future, but time may move at a pace where we can actually observe how a forest over time moves across the landscape, almost like a browsing herd of bison, for example. There's different physics in the imaginal world. Something that's solid might be simultaneously solid and hollow. Recently up in Canada, I was interacting with a stone and really inviting it to reveal itself to me, and I could feel how solid it was, but I also became aware of a being that lived inside it, not surprisingly, a dwarf-type being, and for that being, the stone was quite open. They could move through it. It had the quality of being like the inside of the geode. They could move through what was solid to us in this world. In their world, it was a different kind of experience. So, I have that song, This Is How We Fly, This Is How We Breathe Underwater. I think most of you trainers have heard that. That is the physics also of living in the imaginal world. We meet many entities in the imaginal world and they may shapeshift. So, for example, we might meet a squirrel that becomes a wise old person that becomes a, an angel, and the angel may tower, 100 feet in the air, and then may the next minute be a child talking to us, and so on. There may be a cooperative manifestation, so we may have an intention, like we come to a forest wall and we want there to be a trail, and a trail appears. Much of the communication is symbolic, so we may be given gifts or views or sights that are not not given to us in discursive thought or language, but we can nevertheless understand. And all the entities in the imaginal world have these creative powers. So a useful technique is the one that I use in my alchemy courses and increasingly in Houses of the Heart, which is these guided imaginal journeys through which we build worlds that become, in my view, kind of like our base camps. And so I don't recall if any of you did that course with me, but if you did, you would have gone through a series of 5 or 6 guided imaginal journeys that built on each other to help really create a very accessible imaginal world, which you would be able to visit at any time and use it as a base camp for all kinds of journeys. Now, the heart sense I've talked about quite a bit, and I want you to be maybe reveal a little bit more about why it's so important here. And the main thing is that just as the brain is the seat of discursive consciousness, the heart is the seat of imaginal consciousness. So we have to really cultivate this open heart to really feel our way into the imaginal world where we can have these relationships with other than human beings that can then blossom into this creative act of where the relationship becomes a new entity, and through our participation in that creative act, our own medicine is ignited. Now, the heart sense spontaneously awakens when we cultivate an awareness of how our other senses connect us to the world. So, pleasures of presence and what's in motion awaken the heart sense, ideally. And so nature's an ideal setting for this. In nature, we don't have to be so guarded that we might feel, in the human-built world. And when that heart sense awakens, and it opens a portal into the imaginal, and you're probably all aware that there's research related to forest therapy, nature connection, where it talks about, if you go into the forest, you'll experience awe. Well, awe is a symptom of the opening of the heart sense, of the portal. It's a symptom of that connection somehow with the imaginal, but we don't, for the most part, know how to ride the wave of awe. And so when that portal opens, we can enter it. We can fully go through it with our imaginal capacity, especially if it's guided by intention. So intention is very important here, because when I talk about offering our image to the imaginal entity, the intention is probably the most important, powerful type of image that we offer. If you've ever invited someone to have a conversation with a tree and you've made this suggestion, you said, maybe share with it why you've come on this walk today. What you've done is you've encouraged them to speak of their intention, an intention that they may not have been aware of at all. Intention can come in many forms. You can speak it, you can draw, it can appear, let's say if you create a mandala or if you create a work of art or something like that. The intention that matters is the intention that's carried within the heart. And so it's not so much an intention to figure something out, maybe, but it's more like, I came here today carrying a prayer or a question, or I have an ask for support, something like that. Now, the stronger this image is, the greater is the potential for it to meet the image from the other than human being and create a very strong relationship. So in order to have a strong image, some of the pieces of that are you'd have precision and clarity and commitment to that image. And those can be cultivated through meditation, prayer, study, and other methods. This, by the way, is one of the really powerful pieces of going on the Vision Fast, like with School of Lost Borders, because so much time is spent, even months before you arrive, on looking at what your intention is and really getting that very, very clear before you go out into your fast. So I'm grateful to School of Lost Borders for the experiences I've had that have taught me so much about intention. So here's just a little chart to maybe help visualize some of what I'm talking about. The human image, the attention, is taken out onto the land where it encounters the image, the offering of an other than human being. And so this is the other than human being making an impression somehow upon our imaginations. Our capacity to receive that impression is where the imaginal faculty is of critical importance, and it's where the reception of that, the offering of it, meet, and a relationship is formed, and out of that relationship comes this new entity that we can refer to as medicine. Now, in this case, I want to say that medicine is, and it becomes its own autonomous entity. And I also want to say that the other than human image that we meet is one that is looking for us. So if you've ever gone into the forest and had the sense that the forest is saying, well, I'm glad you're here, welcome here, we need you, that's probably some imaginal entity that you're receiving an impression from that literally needs the contact with the image that you're offering for it to evolve just as we need it for us to evolve. So through these meetings, we form these relationships. One of the products of our evolution is the appearance in the world of medicine. Ceremony is a really important part of this. So it's a framework for offering an image to the imaginal world. When you go out on a fast, that's held as a ceremony. And one of the main characteristics of that is that it focuses intention. I have felt that ceremony gets the attention of imaginal entities. One of the reasons I felt that is because of the powerful events that have happened for me when I've been in deep ceremony, like the appearance of the sap on the millennia dead wood, and I think probably many of you are aware that I have a set of those stories that have all happened in the context of ceremony, including just recently when I was out on a fast too about 3 months ago, when that ceremony resulted in a very powerfully magical event happening on the fourth day of fasting. So ceremony can foster the creation of these relationships, and those relationships that it fosters are a new entity in the imaginal world. They have the potential to manifest in the sensate world. And that's, I think, is what is meant by one of the categories of magic, a very legitimate form of magic. It doesn't involve well, I'm not going to talk more about that right now. Now, the process of intentionally cultivating relationships for the purpose of creating your medicine, of strengthening your medicine, who you are, I am calling Imaginal Alchemy. So this is a term I have coined recently, and for me that's been a very logical evolution from the practice of forest therapy, something that I intuited in our process of relational forest therapy from the beginning, but really in the last year or so has started to become very clear to me. So one way to map that out is that over the standard sequence is beginning with the threshold of connection. We have this experience of sensual embodiment. We awaken the heart sense. We may feel awe, grief, or some other kind of opening in our heart, and that's a portal. And as guides, we can then offer imaginal invitations, and from those imaginal invitations, actually um, develop relationships. So the relationship, again, it's an image to image meeting that creates a new entity in the imaginal world, and that entity we can refer to as medicine. And then we can, through the strength of our relationship with that medicine, we can begin to embody that, to bring it into the world in a healing way that is informed by and co-created with the more than human world. So I come here at the end of this to this quote from The Little Prince, very insightful and profound book, where the Little Prince says, "It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye." Now, I think that this is not poetry. I think this is instruction. And so I would like to leave you with a invitation to consider this seriously. And I do hope that this presentation